So I'm going to start with creating a schedule in the walk-in scheduler. So at this point, everything has been, course requests has been dumped into the walk-in scheduler. And then at this point, counselors will start working on cleaning up the requests, making sure, because the way it works at Valhalla in terms of entering looks different than Monte Vista, and I know that because they shared it out yesterday. At Monte Vista and Mount Miguel, they sit down and do some things with the kids, where Valhalla it's like, hey, you better go home and take this to your parent, otherwise, they're going to be in Mary Beth's office. So they've all been dumped in, and some of them have been checked at this point, and some of them have not. At Grossmont, to be honest with you, we got bogged down in meeting with every kid and trying to do it on the computer, so we ended up having conversations around those laundry sheets. And another reason we kept the laundry sheets is we were a little worried about how it was all going to work out. Is it all going to end up being there? And to be honest with you, that's why we had it. So at this point, counselors are going through schedules of students and making sure, hey, you're in the correct English class, because in the drop-down menu, Dave's going to show you, there's a lot of options. And so last year I was tasked with trimming those options down, and you'll see. So you'll see it can be confusing to pick a senior English class. So they're going through and they're finalizing that, because we want to get to the load. You got the load study, but you want to get the best numbers possible, and you want to make sure that the errors are fixed, because that will give you better info. And the more accurate the info is, the better your schedule is going to be. One of the things we talked about in the break was, like, I heard Kimberly wants to start that schedule and have it ready right after spring break as a goal.
Yes, that is the goal.
Okay, so we talked, kind of like goes along with our conversation, was how do you do that? Because that's the whole thing that bogged me down personally at Grossmont. I had to write in rules. I'll talk about that, but you have to write in teacher rules, you have to write in loading rules, you have to write in rules for what the teachers could teach, when they can teach it, the classroom they're in. So I spent probably about a month worth of time doing all that stuff. And when Jay Elmquist came out and we were supposed to meet and do these things, and I didn't have all of the rules in, so we couldn't do it. So I think at some point we're going to meet with department chairs. The process looks very similar, but at some point I'm going to go, hey, I'm still only going to have, my art teacher's only going to teach 5 classes. I'm not adding a 6th there. If I get a 6th class, it's going to be in world language, first-year Spanish is where we're going to put it. So you can, on historical, what's going to happen. We have a large sophomore class, it's about 630 students. So we got a little bump going through. Right now we got more 10th grade English classes and social science classes and a little bit in biology that's going to move into the 11th grade next year. So you can kind of predict those things. So we'll do that and move forward with the schedule, because regardless, if you wait for those numbers, there's always changes that need to be made. Personally, we were overstaffed in algebra, and I had to go to the department chair and tell them, hey, we need another geometry. Okay, so course manipulations and schedules. Not yet. I got a lot of grief on so I took even more pictures of my master schedule thing. So that's like a basket. I go, I can't show this basket. That's not very masculine. So let me zoom in close. So there's a basket back there. But it's very, and for those of you guys that did it in VAX, and I heard stories about overnight. I wasn't doing it when it was overnight, but it's a lot faster, and Dave's going to be able to show you how you can manipulate. And so it's easy to move them around, and it's easy to show stuff. So it can be a very transparent process for the department chairs, working with your principal, and working with other teachers. The problem, though, is you just got to have good information, good data, and so that's the key. So you can start moving forward, but then some of the bells and whistles that Dave's going to show, classes that are under, like don't have enough students. Infinite Campus is pretty smart and will tell you, hey, you got too many sections. So you want to make sure you turn that off, because if you're guesstimating, my 9th grade class, I loaded them all in English, I loaded them all in algebra, I loaded them all in PE and geography tech with the 2 electives. So some of these reports you pull, they were showing up as errors because I knew they were errors. I didn't have the information to program. The idea with Infinite Campus this first year was, do you start fresh, or do you want to build a brand new schedule? So I was drinking the Kool-Aid. I said, let me do everything this thing can do. So I spent a lot of time writing rules, doing all the stuff to find out that, hey, I didn't have all the course selections in for it to be effective. And so, hey, I ended up tweaking last year's schedule, and it worked out okay. I chose to roll over from last year. It automatically rolls in, and changes can be made quickly, and the process does not take days, and it's going to be impressive when you guys see it. And at this time, so when you're rolling it over and you're tweaking, making the changes, this is when you're going to have those the individual teachers according to the load study. So you'll refer back to that and go, hey, we're a little overstaffed. A lot of kids want stuff, and just because they request it doesn't mean they're going to get it. Unfortunately, and hopefully, it sounds like we might be able to give them a little bit more than what we've had to in the past. So course manipulation. So here's a bigger shot of my board. And Dave's going to demo this, but course manipulation in VAX was always kind of like a process. It's like, I'm going to make this small change and see where my percentage goes. I'm going to make this next one. Oh, that one didn't go very well. Let me back up. So then it was very systematic and took time, because you'd have to clear it. You'd make your changes, clear it, and then rerun it. And that was a good 15 minutes. Where the course manipulation, Dave's going to show you, it happens like this. And the one nice thing about Infinite Campus is it will load across the board. It will load. The one we were messing around with, loaded. And I'll let Dave talk about that. But courses can be moved both vertically and horizontally very easily. So this is then you're continuing those changes, you're having conversations, and you're continuing these FTE discussions. So this is my FTE sheet, a Google Doc that I shared with our principal secretary and Dan. And it's helpful, and we have the general fund and then all of the other funding sources, and then it adds it up. I didn't want to put multiple shots, but down at the bottom it shows if we're in the negative, if we're in the good, the different totals across the bottom. So you're having constant conversations with your principal, like what changes are we going to make, what are the priorities, all the things that we've talked about. And I found it's easier to add a class, something to think about. So you guys that are doing it for the first time, it's easier to add a class than to delete it. So you guys all know this, but if I've been in a class for 3 days and then I shut it down, those are a lot of angry parents. Whereas if they've never were in a class, at Grossmont, what we ended up having to do, I just loaded up study hall. I didn't want to overload any classes because I didn't want to put 41 in, because then why is Johnny coming out? So then when we added, you can be the nice guy. The counselors are always happy to add. And then you want to just make sure you're communicating any of these staffing changes to the principal secretary, because stuff needs to go to HR. If there's adding a 6/5 or if you're maybe deleting something. So I used the Google Doc, and it was helpful. So the review process, here's a picture of Dave. It can take many forms. It can take many forms. So here's a picture of him. He has classes up for seniors, broken down by periods, and across the bottom he has class totals, so the number of section totals. That's great. I've never done it that way. I've looked at it, and then what's always kind of happened, we had a discussion around this, is sometimes weird things happen, and it's like, why don't you have more senior classes first period? Well, it went up when I didn't. And so just something to think about revisiting, and whether you do it on a Google Doc, whether you do it visually with a team, because I would recommend involving, and that's something I'm going to change at Grossmont. I'm going to bring in as many people, because for those of you guys that are new to this, it's easy for counseling to complain about something they were not a part of, because Tropp went in there and made it in isolation. So something to think about. And so you're having ongoing discussions, you're balancing. Then when you need to make changes, who calls department chair? How does it work at your site? Because that's something that's site-based. So you'll look at the master schedule report and then look at possible changes, and that may be adding a class, or hey, you need to cut number of biology sections, you need more chemistry. Sometimes you want to make the change immediately and move forward. And this is the frustrating part, in my opinion, because I got to make a phone call to the department chair, who hopefully can get a hold of the teacher or teachers that the change is involving. So that's where it becomes, you got to kind of just sit back and relax, because during summer, I'm chomping at the bit. I want to get these changes made. I want to get everything done. I want to get to the next part, because we're still not done with making the schedule. So we're making changes, we're tweaking, we're doing those things. So at this point, so you're done making changes, the schedule's kind of finalized, you've had those difficult conversations, you feel like you're done messing with the schedule so that you can go ahead and roll it into the student, you can stop messing around in the back end. And Dave's going to demonstrate this, but there's a back end and a front end, and it's really kind of cool in Infinite Campus because you can make changes and you can work on things. It's not like, hey, stop messing with it. The registrar's working in VAX. Don't add anything. So you don't need to do that. The one thing, there are some things you need to worry about, but you can have something active. So at some point we stop doing that and we move it into the Student Gap Scheduler report. So at that point, I print the Student Gap Scheduler report where I can tell it loads kids with classes and with teachers. So they have a schedule and I know where they're at. And at that point, I will look at, I split it up over the summer. At this point, I got it to them before my GISs went on summer break. So we split it up. Then I started working on it as well. But at that point, we will look for hard conflicts that we leave for counselors. But anything like easy, like, oh, it just didn't load in for whatever reason, we will work through those changes to try to minimize it. So that way when counselors come back, it's lightened their load somewhat. So an example of that would be maybe a student that wants to take AP Choir, they want to take Advanced Theater, AP Physics, and AP Calculus BC. So you're talking about a student that has a lot of singletons. And so at that, the schedule's built, they can't get every single class, and so they're going to have to make a choice. They can get 3 of the 4 classes they want, or 4, let's just say 4 out of the 5 classes they want. They're going to have to pick something else. So you would leave that for the counselor to have the conversation around. And then at this point, you're still continuing the FTE discussions with the principal, talking about those type of changes, talking about where the staffing is and where you're at. And this whole time, I know at Grossmont, we're chasing our enrollment number as well. You're trying to get kids in, you're trying to get the registration, you're doing all that stuff. So then the other interesting thing, and something for you guys to maybe talk about at your site is, like, what information do you guys use to program? I think we kind of talked about it a little bit, but at Grossmont, we were able to access the feeder client schools, and they were willing to share student grade printouts. So we go pick up all of our kids we're getting from Emerald, all the kids we're getting from Cajon Valley, Parkwood Middle. So something like that. So grades, teacher recommendations, student and parent input, that's where that, whether it's the laundry sheet or if it's a Google Doc or something. But that's kind of an overview of the second part of it while you're still planning, getting to the Student Gap Scheduler report and then out of the back end of campus.